Didn't see you there. Welcome to a castover. We've got Neblime against the Shambler, a ZVZ matchup on Nemesis Station, a map by Balefall. This is actually the third game in a set. I casted the first two. They'll be unlisted in the description because I forgot to record game audio. And that's just stupid. So anyway, if you want the context of that matchup, you can hear my commentary at the very least, so caw. Yeah, it was an interesting set of matches. We ended up seeing Neblime and the Shambler duke it out across Main Street for the first matchup and this particular map for the second. And in that game, we just saw ZVZ in a way that we hadn't seen before. The second game in particular had longer running time and ended up being like a prolonged siege affair. But all in all, it's not like the quality of the matches was so subliminal or sublime rather, to the point where they absolutely had to be cast. So it's a loss, but not a huge one. We'll see if this third game delivers in the same way that maybe the second game did. It was a little bit bigger of a game, but obviously because of the longer running time, you can imagine maybe somebody wasn't GGing or something like that. Oh no, I would never spoil the game. Of course, check it out at your own peril. But no, it was a reasonable match, and it gave us some interesting opportunity to discuss certain things. So something that we've seen here is that Neblime really favors the Zorkiz opener, and the Shambler, on the other hand, is starting to use Hydrock as an opener against it. So this is actually the same spawns as the second matchup on this map, and what we ended up seeing out of this particular go is that, the previous version of this, is pretty much exactly what we see here, actually. So, in fact, this is eerily familiar to the point where I feel like maybe I've casted the same game as before, so we'll wait and see that one. Oh no, there was different typing before. So yeah, this is actually a different game. The colors are similar too. I think it was like orange and whatever this color is. I think it's just white and bronze. Okay, I think it was like a different tone for Neblime. But yeah, so this is a different game. This worker heckling didn't happen before. So it's going to be a fast set of Hydras, as well as a Spraythout. Shambler has not scouted. He didn't scout in the second game either. He assumes that Neblime's playstyle is going to remain standard. Maybe they even had an agreement or something to say, like, hey, you should build Gorgs anyway, just to see if we can do that. Either way, it'll be interesting for us. It's actually going to be a Neblime fast expansion. Something that Shambler said in the previous game is that he believes that when you go Hydrock, you're forced on the defensive versus Gorg. And I think it's interesting that Neblime is going this way. He's actually pivoting out of that to go for a fast expansion with a Lakizalisk for defense, and assuming that Shambler will remain on the defensive, and he hasn't scouted, so this is perfect. This is punishing your opponent for being lax in the scouting department. Obviously, some workers were... I'm not sure if they were cut per se, but obviously he's getting his workers a little bit later than he could have to amass this 5 Hydra push-out timing. And there will be at least one, probably 2 Lakizalisks here to meet him in this context, which is pretty powerful as far as like a safeguarding. And so basically Shambler will have to scout this and said, basically he'll have to decide... we haven't, by the way. We'll have to decide that... I guess I should just immediately expand, because he's not going to be able to break this. Even with an Ovalith, I don't think he'll be able to. But yeah, something that happened at the beginning of this game before they realized that Gorgorkors had their movement speeds nerfed is that they had no idea that the Gorgorkor had its movement speed nerfed. They hadn't checked the patch notes before playing this. And obviously the game does change pretty frequently on these pre-release versions, so it's not really any surprise that sort of thing has happened. But hey, the main thing that I would say is pretty nice that Neblime is here to type at Shambler. One of the things that I'm definitely aware of, though, is that, so I think Beaver was mentioning this in considering future changes. He was there's like a thread that we have on the Discord server that you can post longer form feedback in general. And I do think that having that creep spread would be nice, the Kagra spread. The main problem is the fact that you desync it from the SEM draft preview, but I guess realistically speaking, it wouldn't be the end of the world if it was like a little bit wider. I do think it's actually possible to do that relatively easily. I'm not sure, realistically speaking, how easy it is, but we'll check it out. Because we did have smaller spreads for the Bactylisk way back in the day when the Bactylisk was still called the Basilisk, actually. And I think even into its time as renamed as the Bactylisk, when you would burrow it, it would spread Kagra. It had Kagra Genesis. So, yeah, it's not really massively surprising that, you know, people would be thinking, oh yeah, sure, if you could do that with the Bactylisk, it's fine. But the fact that it was mobile and the fact that it was smaller, it just didn't jive well with the Kager code at the time, the creep code, if you will. So it's a little bit different now. But anyway, as we're talking about all this stuff, Neblime has gone for this fast expo. Shambler setting his up. It doesn't even look like Shambler has gone across the map yet, so Neblime definitely favored in terms of map control and map knowledge, and he should actually just be able to comfortably go out to a third base if he wants to, especially as he scouts this base being set up and not really a whole lot going on. So he'll start to chip down at the K grid over here. I don't think he's going to really do too much. He's going to reveal that there are indeed a mass of Hydras. He's actually going to recall all of his units as well. I feel like this is a mistake that a lot of players make, where they recall all of their Gorger cores or all of their units that are out on the map. It makes sense to put them on a control group so that you can recall them if you absolutely need to, but most players are doing it a lot sooner than they need to, and it's actually valuable to have this information, because if Shambler was going for a drop or skiths or something like that, you would want to know that information before they hit you. And at this point now, the map looks a lot darker for both of our players, but particularly for Neblime. Going for a third base, you can see his camera is in the top left. That tells you that he's going for that, and he's getting a Hydrock Den to back up his Gorger Corps army with some Izzies and some Hydras. We saw this in Main Street, actually. It was a fairly reasonable composition. Again, if you're not watching those unlisted games, then you won't know. But that's why I'm telling you. And the Gorgs are in a pretty good spot to clump up and deal some pretty good damage. There's an attempt at splitting, but there's more Hydras here, and I think Shambler will win this fight relatively handily. There's another one coming down to start applying some more pressure. But the splits, again, they're pretty reasonable. Unfortunately, the spread of damage is not so good, so Shambler is not going to win this as decidedly as he should have. In fact, he might only have like a single Hydra left. Ah, spin! So, yeah. In fact, he might not win it at all. So that's definitely a bit awkward, because he could have focused he spread the units well, but he could have focused the damage onto individual Gorgs, and that would have saved more of his Hydras. So definitely a bit awkward for him there. I like the attempt. You know, it's got 12 HP. Looks like that Hydra was unloaded from the Avalith. Wanted to keep that one alive, of course. Something to mention about Gorgs is that not only do they move slower, attack slower, have no armor pen, the Zorki's Shroud in the modern patch, which is not what this is, this does not have this change, but the Zorki's Shroud itself is 5 seconds longer to make. And another thing to point out that I was mentioning in the Main Street cast, actually, is that I plan to revise the Gorger Corps when it has a new graphic to have its blades be facing on the lower end of it, so that it's basically it only uses its AoE attack against ground targets. And then its air attack is going to be something that's sort of similar to the Bones of Reflection from the passive that the Zarkaver Corps has, the mutation of the Gorger Corps. And essentially what that would do is it would imply that, and that's what it will use for air. It'll be a channeled attack like normal, so if you have air units, it has to choose to attack either an air unit or a ground unit, and the splash will only deal damage to ground targets and not to air units, and that sort of stuff. This third base is nearly complete, so that will provide some much-needed extra economic status and boon. We'll see if he ends up going for Lakissilisks or anything like that. He could obviously put a macro hatch here and start to isolate this area with defenses and Lakissilisks to prevent this angle of attack from existing, but it's actually going to be an elevator play. It seems to have been spotted out at some point by Neblime, who has some pretty reasonable game sense here. So he's going to go ahead and station some of his Hydras over in this location. I'm not sure if it was just like out of the very edge of the vision or something. He might be able to comment below or something like that later on. And you can see here the Hydras, again, trying to focus down Gorgs. They will actually get the second one, so that wasn't too bad there, but it could have been better for Shambler. Although the fact that it was spotted a little bit ahead of time means that it's just a little bit too difficult to make it work, you know. Small margins, but that's what CMBW can sometimes turn into. We've all seen this sort of thing happen in Brood War. And hey, this matchup is going pretty well overall as far as like being somewhat stable. It's not as silly as the Main Street game, and it's not as one-sided, I guess, as the second match. So this one's a little bit more back and forth, and both players technically have an opportunity to clutch out a victory here. But you can see Neblime stretching ahead in worker count, and obviously having this third base does mean that, you know, for a while he's going to be setting it up, fortifying it, spending some money to staff it with workers, but he's also stretching across the map, guarding against third base expansions. Shambler is going to be going for one over here, but he's not stationed his army to defend it. So at this stage, it doesn't look like he'll even put it down just yet. The Hydras are going to, you know, stamp that out. If he can keep the Droleth alive, then, as he does, he can actually pull it back over here and set the base up with the help of the defending army. One thing to note about taking this position instead, that's an unfortunate mistake there. You're losing these Oristhilith for nothing. But something to mention is obviously controlling this bridge is important because it's one of the only land access ways to the left-hand side. But realistically, you want to take this base too, because otherwise they can take this side path. And you also almost want to do, again, like a macro hatch or something over here to isolate this base, set up some defenses. It's a bit of an awkward thing to learn because most maps don't do something like that. But I think once you start to piece that together and realize, hey, I should build some sort of static defense over here, even a macro hatch as Zerg is not a bad idea. That's the sort of thing that you can do. And I guess another thing that you can do is you can take an Ovaleth and you can lift up a K-Grid and just land it there, and that will start to spread the K-Grid for you so you can build more structures. That's something that I haven't seen people do before, but I have a feeling that as we get more and more familiar with the mechanics that are available, that is something that you're going to see. Iris is also something you're going to see. It looks like Shambler is going to be a little bit behind on it, but there we go. He's calling it. But yeah, Iris for both players actually at relatively similar times. So Shambler's kind of been a little bit on the more greedy side, you could say. I mean, he's behind in terms of military count, slightly in terms of worker count, and he's only now getting his third base. So obviously we favor Neblime's positioning, but Neblime is taking his sweet time. He's recognizing he needs to go for tier 2. I think they'll both go for a Gorgorl evolution of the Hydrock Den. That will give them the access to Bactylisks, which is essentially like a souped up Hydra in terms of range, and it has a bounce attack. But it's slow, it's fat, it's often victorious. That sort of thing. So we'll see how this one all plays out. We are seeing more K-Grins drop. I think these are going to be Larvosks, but I'm actually not sure. There's the Gorgorl immediately as the Iroll finishes. Remember that as a player, you'll hear a Tech Up Complete sound separately from your advisor. You'll hear that separately from the standard structure construction finished sound or whatever, even for Zerg. So you'll actually hear, in this case, the Overmind voice, because I haven't replaced the Zerg advisor yet, but you'll hear evolution complete instead of just the normal sound. So you'll hear that in conjunction with that. And that I think is pretty significant, It gives the tell that, hey, your tech is done. Obviously you hear upgrade complete for now for the adjutant for Terran. That will eventually be replaced as well. And speaking of, I made some progress on the Iskatu Mesk advisor. So check that out. Something to take a look at. It's not fully done, but it is, you can at least have some basic stuff, and I'll add some other stuff throughout the week here before I go on my trip. I'm going to try to, add a backlog of videos here as well so that while I'm on my trip, there's still more videos coming out. The biggest concern I have is that people are going to find issues or crashes or some shit, and that's going to really cause some problems, but whatever. We'll do what we do. Luring a single Hydralisk. Will Shambler notice? Yes, he will. All right, there's some posturing happening. Yeah, we are seeing a pretty solid, back and forth game. Shambler a little bit behind on the side of the resources, and of course on the workers on the actual bases, right? He's got very low saturation on his third. There's medium saturation over here, and a Muthrock Spire going down at the third here for Neblime. And the positions are asymmetric, where Neblime has the top left corner base, and it actually allows him to posture against this particular position a little bit easier. He wants to be in a position to defend this anyway. We do have some Tetzoricors out. They are much more durable than Iziricors, and they deal cleave damage, and obviously regress into the Iziricor when popped, but in this particular case, there were just too damn many Bactylisks to really siege this position properly. Some of these did just mutate, so you're not going to have as much army strength consolidated into this one position as you thought you might have. And that means that Shambler's in a bit of an awkward position as he struggles to fall back. He's even going to go ahead and cancel the Bactylisks that were mutating there. A lot of them, maybe 3 or 4 of these Bactylisks were 1 or 2 hits away from being killed. But Bactylisks against Bactylisks is an interesting fight because they have 3 armor and no armor pen. So they're really, it says they deal, what is it, 2 times 7, right? So it says they deal 14 damage, but that's actually, 7 minus 3 in this case. So they're dealing 8 damage instead of 14. That's almost half of the damage that is completely cut in half, right? So that's pretty rough. Pretty rough if you're Bactyl v Bactyl. It's going to take a very long time to finish those fights. So I wouldn't be surprised if we end up seeing something with a bit of a heavier armor pen. That would be like Kagralisks from the Izcag Eteth. We don't see that coming out just yet. We actually don't see any tech at all for Shambler other than the Gorgorl Swamp. So he's... never mind. I spoke too soon. He has a Muthrock Spire out. So, but again, Protathalors, they also have multi-attacks, and they don't have great armor pen. So Bactylisks will also stay alive quite a bit for them, too. Hydras, on the other hand, are actually okay versus Bactyls in terms of dealing damage. It's just that they usually end up getting melted before they can do too much. thanks to the superior range and durability of the Bactalisk. Some fiddling over here, but you can see that there's a bridge of death happening. Yeah, pretty... I guess that's probably going to be the name of this caster. We're just based on that. There's a nice little skirmish there, as well as, of course, the fact that this ZVZ isn't TISM. I mean, maybe that's the thing. Now, there is also a Zerg versus Zerg matchup between these two players I'll cast later on that's apparently like the best ZVZ to date that Shambler was gushing a bit about, and something that I commented on in the second match that, again, is in those unlisted... in that unlisted video in the description is I mentioned that the players here, even after they're done with their games, they post things like, you know, oh my god, you know, like maybe I should have done this, or oh, that unit could have been really good here, and then they like kind of theory craft it with each other about like what might be good in that matchup and stuff, and it tells you that like the games or the game itself is staying with them and providing a little bit more. So these Lakislisk, I'm not sure if Neblime noticed that, but it doesn't look like it. His screen didn't fly over that, so he might not know that the mutas just flew over that, and so they will end up denying this particular base. There's an Izira core here, which is pretty funny. So that should definitely indicate to him, hey, I'm going to get slapped. Now, he does have 2 Spear Tiths. They've got really good armor and do have a bounce attack, so that will cover his main. These Drolets are going to get slapped on their way out. But this 4th base is set up, so... that's going to be the main target here. We do see a Vithrilisk mutating. Not going to be the primary target. Some Bactalisks have been pulled. This gives the ramp over to Shambler, or the bridge rather. That Vithrilisk will be focused down, so there goes the Skiff. But again, we're still trading out, you know, somewhat favorably here. I guess somewhat neutrally, I should say, somewhat evenly. We do not have a Spear Tith here. It's not mutated just yet, and this is where his Muthrock is. So potentially Shambler could focus that down, but I don't think he recognizes it. Here's a single Spraith. It will be focused down relatively easily. There's a Skiff, but not a Vithrilisk. It starts to try to mutate, but obviously that's not going to happen anytime soon. And yeah, more attempts, you know, borrow to avoid pain kind of style. There's not really that many units moving over there. There's a Bactalisk. Okay, there's 4 Bactalisks on the way. More Skiths. Here's the Spear Tith. This is where the mutas are going to need to be a little bit more on the careful side, because even when you kill this, it still turns back into a Spraith. There's a lot of HP you've got to dig through, and meanwhile, the bounce attacks are still hitting. So it doesn't look too effective right now, but again, this is a decent amount of damage to these, and when the Bactalisks are going to arrive with Vithrilisks as well, okay, yeah, the worker count is becoming normalized between the two players, and there's been a lot of damage dealt by this and a lot of tempo gained on the left side of the map, but Shambler is not going to be too long for this world with his mutas, and in the meantime, he hasn't secured a 4th base. So I still have to give the economic advantage over to Neblime, especially if he can restock his geysers. At the same time, Shambler has upgraded 2 of his 3 geysers that are available. He saves 3 of the mutas. He can link those back up. Now there's Vithrilisks out. These will, of course, be remade. Workers will be restaffed. There's actually not a single Excisant out for Monsieur Neblime. Now, there is a Vithrilisk here. And with the Spear Tith with the bounce attack, that's actually going to be pretty significant. But there's only 1 Vithrilisk. So it's actually going to be a little bit easier for this force to... be somewhat defended. Here comes another Vithrilisk. Worker counts again somewhat even here. The bounce attack's mostly going towards the town center and the other units and such. And yeah, you can see here there's probably not going to be too much that can immediately deal with this, right? He needs mutas of his own. He needs Vithrilisks, of course. He needs maybe Izira cores, Bactalisks, something that's a little bit more mobile. But the Muthrock Spire, it just gets absolutely taken down immediately. I think he was trying to kill off some of the... I actually don't know what he might have been attacking an actual unit there. So instead of trying to deal with this, he's going to go ahead for a counterattack. There isn't a crazy amount of defense over here, but a lot of the units are just laying over here. So I do think Neblime is probably going to be on the back foot for the foreseeable future. He lost a base entirely. He's also lost some workers, so his advantage is gone. He has a bunch of mutas, but he doesn't have a Muthrock Spire, and he's not remaking it. So we have to wonder what he's exactly going to be doing. No Excisants, limited gas mining, not harvesting from this geyser. So this base in the middle, you know, he doesn't have that much. So he's actually going to withdraw his anti-ground force. He's going to try to deal with the fact that there's a bunch of Bactals over here. But again, the Vithrilisks... Okay, well, if the mutas end up getting tickled here by the Bactals, that could be really, really bad. The Izira cores held off the Zoristeliths. That's going to stop the front line from existing here from Neblime. He doesn't really have much to deal with this. He's really, really on a knife's edge. The mutas are sort of posturing back and forth. They could even just go back up and start cleaning up that top left base some more. And the Bactalists are finally going to be pushed back, but there's only Protathalors left, and they don't do too well against it. Now the mutas engaged. This is go time for the Vithrilisks. Neblime trying to close the distance, getting some of that debuff spread onto the ground units, because as soon as you hit a target that's already debuffed, it does actually work that way. It sort of spreads to all nearby targets. You can see there, it happened again. So more Vithrilisks are joining the fray. More Mutas are still here, but there's not really much to deal with the Bactylisks. This is the main army here that has to be contended with. Here comes yet another set of Mutas. There's more stuff to deal with, and they're talking about a hash, but at this particular case, it's not actually going to matter, I think. I think the army here is just a little bit too good. Even after the Mutas are dealt with, these Vithrilisks can't do it. And either Win or Tism is right, and GG is going to be called. So there you go. That's 2 bases taken care of for Shambler. He had 4th base set up over here on this side, and he is going to be able to claim victory. It's funny because, without spoiling too much, he was fighting for dignity if this was considered a best of 3. So I do encourage you guys to check out those games, even if you just want to skip through or whatever. I know it's really annoying to watch without the game audio, which is why I'm a big goofball for not checking that before I started. But I hope you guys enjoyed this ZVZ that wasn't stupid, and I'll catch you guys later for another cast.